Now, joining me live from Melbourne is Shadow NDIS and Housing Minister Michael Sukkar. Let's start now with the energy question, Michael Sukkar. Why is the opposition looking to dump a target Australia has committed to with the UN?
Well, because there's no way that Australia is going to meet the target, and this is where these sort of flakey motherhood statements that we just heard from the Education Minister and we constantly hear from this government just don't cut it. The truth is that that target requires us to have, as a precondition, 82% renewables for our energy system. Now, we've got less than half of that at the moment, and 2 years on after legislating their target, the government still hasn't been able to explain to Australians how on earth they're going to meet that most basic assumption of the target. And for those of us who have got a long political memory, Andrew, Australia has always prided itself on entering into international agreements and meeting targets. That was the case with Kyoto, for example, and we were very proud that we would always meet a target that we committed to. And indeed, we criticised countries who just willy-nilly signed onto agreements without any pathway to actually meet the commitment that they've made. Well, here, 2 years on, the government still can't explain how on earth we're going to go from less than half of the 82% renewables we need to the 82% renewables in the next 6 years. Now,
right,
it doesn't happen
Mr.
because
Sukkar,
you wish it happens.
The government's climate change statement is projecting 42% reduction by 2030. That's their climate change statement. Are you saying that's complete tosh?
And that assumes an 82% of our energy comes from renewables. 82. That's what is embedded in that number. That's the assumption upon which that number is derived. We're less than half of that. So the Labor Party is saying, Anthony Albanese and his government are saying, that they're going to have a stunning form reversal and all of a sudden double our renewables in 6 years. But if the truth is that's not going to happen. Australians know that's not going to happen.
But Mr. Sukkar, if you're elected, you wouldn't be very popular internationally. The word pariah could perhaps even be used if you reverse the target. Wouldn't that be the case?
No, we're committed to net zero by 2050. That's what we committed to when we were in government. We committed to that before the last election. This government has made the further interim commitment, a commitment that they cannot show how on earth they're going to meet. And we see this throughout what this government does. They make lofty commitments with no realistic possibility or aspiration of achieving it. Now, that could be the worst outcome for Australia, Andrew. If Australia is looked at as a country, like others that we've criticised over the years, where we wantonly sign onto agreements and make commitments without a realistic pathway of getting there. So,
okay.
I would ask government ministers to come on and explain how on earth we're going to go from half of the 82% renewables we need to 82% renewables by 2030. None of them will be able to explain it to you, Andrew, because they've had 2 years since they legislated this target and they still haven't been able to explain that.
What do you make of the PM's response to the idea of small modular reactors sometime in the future that we played at the top of the show? He just won't accept nuclear at any stage.
Well, look, he's desperately trying to look for anything that distracts from the massive failures of his government and the fact that Australians are suffering on his watch. This is a man who promised $275 power reductions. We've seen average increases of $800. He's broken that commitment. So I'm not surprised at all. I mean, of course he's going to engage in a shocking scare campaign. He thinks that himself and Chris Bowen are the experts and that all of the countries of which we would seek to compare ourselves around the world are somehow stupid because in every single case, those competitors and friends of ours are utilising nuclear as we speak. Australia's paying the highest energy prices in the world. I mean, we used to pride ourselves in having cheap baseload power in this country, and it doesn't matter how much the Prime Minister runs around trying to bag nuclear. Australians know that under him, their prices have gone through the roof. They also know that if we have very hot summers, and we've seen this in report after report, that the possibility of blackouts and brownouts is increasing. So not only will we have higher power prices under Labor, but we're going to have intermittent power in some cases and a power system that is very vulnerable to warm weather, for example, in summer. Now, you can't run industry that way. We've had...
Mr Sukkar, is this the hill the coalition wants to die on, nuclear?
Well, no, I mean, there's a myriad of things that we'll be talking about between now and the election, I can assure you. But a pretty important place to start is that you need cheap and reliable energy in this country. We've seen manufacturing insolvencies in Australia triple under the watch of this government. So many manufacturers say to us, the input costs of higher energy prices just mean we cannot compete with foreign competitors, and that's why they're going to the wall. Australians see it every quarter when they get their power bills. They see the power bills going through the roof, and yet they look at the Prime Minister before the election who lied to them and said that he was going to deliver $275 a year energy price reduction. That is the most blatant lie we've seen in Australian politics probably in our lifetime, Andrew.
Okay, well, I've seen a few lies in my time. Let's talk now about this estimates evidence concerning the NDIS, your portfolio areas. Let's get on to that. Everything from heroin to cocaine being bought through the NDIS to $10,000 holidays. Shocking waste of taxpayer money. The government argues it's the appointment of their fraud guy, John Dardo, which has exposed all of this, and all of this used to happen under your government. What's your response to that?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that we've seen fraud go through the roof under the administration of Bill Shorten and his hand-picked CEO. You've got to remember, Andrew, we had estimates processes when we were in government. These sorts of cases weren't coming out then, and I doubt it's because the Labor Party wasn't trying to dig them up at the time. The reason why these are coming out now is clearly the problem's getting worse. In the last estimates period, Andrew, it was revealed that people were procuring prostitutes under the NDIS, paying for prostitutes with NDIS money. We saw that recently released criminals of the most vile sexual offences were using the NDIS to try and procure young female care workers. They've got a fraud task force now.
They've got a fraud task force you didn't have.
No, Andrew, no. They renamed the fraud task force that already existed. Bill Shorten's one thing that he's done, I'll give him credit, he's done one thing since he's been the minister. He changed the name of the fraud task force to the Fusion Fraud Task Force. Congratulations, he rebranded it, he renamed it. The fraud task force was already there, and he was very embarrassed in Parliament last week when he was forced to correct the record in Parliament because he made the claim that we hadn't looked at fraud, and then within about 5 minutes we were able to provide example after example of where we had. So he actually was forced to come back into the House and apologise for misleading the House. So even within 5 minutes of making that claim, he had to backtrack. He renamed the task.
We're nearly out of time.
Sure.
You mentioned the $73,000 car in question time that was purchased under the NDIS. Do you think that's a particularly shocking case?
Of course it is. I mean, it's a remarkable case. Obviously, the NDIS funds things like modifications to vehicles for people with disabilities to ensure that they can drive, and every Australian would absolutely support that. But a new car, prostitutes, cocaine, heroin, alcohol, these sorts of things diminish the standing of the NDIS in the eyes of the public, who are very generous and supportive.
Well, I've learned that car was purchased by a self-management participant when you were in office in 2021. In other words, that occurred while you were in office. So this goes to the government's argument, doesn't it? Their audits have picked up these sort of things. Your government didn't.
That was public. I mean, the point, so that's not a point of contention, but the point here is that the ministers had 2 years to address these issues. So you've got to remember, we went to the election acknowledging that some of these issues existed. Bill Shorten said he was going to fix them. What's happened is they've got worse, and it's extended from cars now to prostitutes, cocaine, heroin and alcohol. So it's seemingly getting a lot worse. And Bill Shorten's been there and this government's been there for 2 years. What on earth have they done for 2 years? What on earth have they done? Bill Shorten put his hand-picked CEO into the role. He went to the election promising Australians that the NDIS was safe in his hands. I think this week has proven once and for all that it's far from safe in his and this government's hands. And in fact, the NDIS will need a coalition government to sort out so many of the problems that have been exacerbated on the watch of this minister and government.
Michael Sukkar, thanks so much for your time this morning.
Thanks, Andrew.